Well, we want to welcome you again to another one of our live streams here at Determinetruth. We're so glad that you could join us for this critical conversation on immigration in the United States. This is a profoundly complex and often divisive issue, and our goal today is not to offer easy solutions because I don't think there are any, but instead we want to step back and approach this issue from a biblical and ethical perspective and consider both the responsibilities of a nation to protect its citizens and its responsibilities to uphold its laws, as well as the call for Christians to love and care for our neighbors, especially the vulnerable. So immigration is not just a political issue. It's a human issue. It's a justice issue. And as followers of Christ, it's a deeply theological issue. So we know that people are crossing borders for many reasons, including the fact that some are seeking safety from violence, others are fleeing extreme poverty. We also recognize and want to recognize that nations have a right to secure their borders and a responsibility to protect its citizens. So the question that we want to ask then, or the questions we want to ask, begins with how do we balance these realities while upholding the biblical call to justice, compassion, and the love of our neighbor? So today we're probably just going to begin this conversation. We're going to have more live streams planned in the coming weeks. If you're watching us live, feel free to go ahead and put a comment in the comment box. Let us know where you're watching from, but also go ahead and ask a question. We'll do our best to get to it. If it's something that we know we're going to address in a future live stream, we might save it for a future live stream. So to stay informed on these conversations, please subscribe to the Determinetruth YouTube page, like the episodes, leave a comment. You can also sign up for the monthly Determinetruth email by going to the contact page at determinetruth.com and leaving us your information there. So in this series, we hope to explore what the scriptures, both the Old and the New Testament, say, as well as what they say about welcoming the foreigner and loving our neighbors. But we're also going to discuss the state's role in protecting its people. We won't shy away from addressing the corruption and injustices that have happened within our immigration system. We're going to look at some of the real-life consequences of mass deportations. We have a live stream scheduled for a couple weeks from now. I don't have it posted yet because we haven't solidified the date and the time. But in a couple weeks from now, with a young man named Bakanzi and his family telling his story, a phenomenal story, unbelievable story. We want to hear his story and stories like that as well. And our goal really is to ask the question, what does it look like to faithfully reflect Christ in our approach to immigration, and how can we move beyond partisan talking points and engage this issue with wisdom, truth, and love? So I'm going to welcome, as always, our colleague, my colleague and good friend, Danny. So welcome, Danny. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be back. Good to be on these things again.
Great. And we are really excited to have our guest today, a good brother and a good friend, Mako Nagasawa. So welcome, Mako.
Hi, Rob. Hi, Danny.
Yeah.
Mako grew up in Cerritos, California, and he went north to Stanford, which I think because you couldn't get into my alma mater at Cal State Hayward, you had to go across the bay to Stanford. I won't hold that against you, Mako. But nonetheless, he worked at Intel Corporation for 6 years while serving a Spanish-speaking congregation to Mexican ministry to Mexican immigrants in East Palo Alto, California. He married his wife Ming for 25 years ago in May 1999, almost her 26th anniversary coming up pretty soon. And then they moved to Boston, where, of course, God lives, in Massachusetts. He then worked for two, you notice how I had to cough after I said that. He then worked for two startup companies trying to bring technology and jobs to inner city communities. Since the year 2000, Mako, Ming, and their two children, John and Zoe, have lived among friends in a Christian intentional community house in a black and brown neighborhood in Dorchester, Massachusetts, where I think Mako knows my mom graduated from Dorchester High School in never mind, we won't say what year, but 1900s. Mako did campus ministry with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship from 2001 to 2014. And then he founded the Anástasis Center in 2014. And we want to hear more about that, Mako. They worship at the Neighborhood Church of Dorchester, Mass., where Mako serves in the elder team. Here in the Master of Theological Studies from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Seminary, probably because he couldn't get into my alma mater, which I won't name right now, but that's okay. In 2019, in addition to Christian ethics, theology, biblical studies, and early church history, Mako enjoys photography, food, tea, and stories from around the world, and he misses the Pacific Ocean in California. I think he also misses the sun and the warmth, by the way. So welcome, Mako.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So it's almost going to be in the 40s here today as well here in Phoenix, but that would be 40s Celsius. So
exactly.
Yeah. All right, Mako, tell us more about the Anástasis Center, the work that you do. I know you have some classes coming up that I'm looking forward to joining in a couple of weeks. Tell us more about that and what you do.
Thanks. Well, thank you so much. The Anástasis Center, we are a small team. Our mission is to proclaim the restorative justice of God and the healing atonement of Jesus. We are anchored in the early church. And so we are trying to highlight some of the things that the early church taught, and then the way they lived. There's a lot of cool lessons because they lived before the empire absorbed the church, right? So that's itself is really important.
Yeah.
And just kind of bringing all that forward to show how relevant it is, how life-giving it is, spiritually forming it is. So we do a number of things. One of them is to teach Zoom classes or to try to form more community and learning spaces online. So a few things coming up would be Along Repentance. In May, there are 2 new classes, Along Repentance, which if you're interested in decolonizing your faith, but actually being more grounded in Christ and in the Christian faith, this is really important because we explore some of the ways that colonialism deformed Christian faith that kind of continue to influence us and kind of in many ways haunt us today, especially in the U.S., as it relates to also segregated housing, schooling, and policing, that these things have theological roots. It's amazing to explore. Another one is a combination. It's more on spiritual formation, but it's using a tool that was developed by the early Christians. Some people, who are familiar with the Enneagram, that's a modern day thing. And I understand there's some controversy about, what that is and stuff. But in the early church, there was these, the lists, right? There are 9 fruit of the Spirit. And people went off into the desert or into just communities in urban places to focus on Christian virtue ethics and how to transform one's character and grow in these Christian virtues. We're going to combine that with C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, which is really, really fun. So as folks know or may know, Lewis is really good at describing why it is that in his view of, or in his telling of, it's an allegory, but of hell, people choose to be there. And it's because they are continuing to resist the call to grow in virtues. So, you get the positive and the kind of negative illustrations of that. So, those are just 2 of the things we do. We also, I'm hoping sometime in May to convene a group of people who just want to talk about restorative justice in parenting, right? Like, not easygoing parenting, but like not tough, retributive, punitive, parenting either. And so I think it's a really life-giving conversation. So people could check the website for that, anastasiscenter.org.
Great. Thank you, Mako. This immigration thing is such a huge issue. I live down here in Tucson. I'm 80, 90 miles from the southern border. It's talked about a lot. It's a huge issue all the time. But let's be a lot of concerns. Let's lay out some of those before we can dive into some specifics. What are some of the most pressing issues that you see when we're discussing immigration today? And how do you acknowledge these, and acknowledging these complexities, how can we have productive conversations in the church? So what are some of the issues? How can we even approach this subject?
Oh gosh, there probably in the big bucket categories, there's domestic concerns, there's security concerns, and there's foreign policy concerns, right? And so some of the domestic concerns would be issues of human rights and civil rights. How much do we weight that? Our domestic economy. Do we need more housing, right? How do we offer help to states like yours, cities like yours, which are on the front lines of the border, and you're going to be overwhelmed by migrants coming through, and hospitals, schools, other kinds of social services are just, I know they're being overwhelmed. Here in Boston, we have had a huge crisis in housing, and we've tried to do things like have a guarantee approach to guarantee housing to folks. But we've been maxed out, and it's caused crisis. So at the very least, we need more coordination domestically, both in cities, states, and nationally. So the security concerns would be, kind of things like, who are we letting in here? Do we know these people? Are we vetting them? What about drug traffic? What about human trafficking? Right. And so I've done some work with anti-human trafficking organizations in restorative justice, context, learning context, and application context, and that's a big concern, right? Like vulnerable women, usually, sometimes young boys, get snatched up, brought across the border. How do we deal with that? What responsibilities do we have? So we do need a strong border, and then there's just foreign policy discussions or considerations, because the U.S. has done a lot to destabilize Haiti, Central America, and then there's some discourse here that would blame people from these countries from fleeing the conditions that we helped to create. Sure. And Rob, I know you wrote an article about this on your Patheos site, which I really appreciated, and I thought was a great introduction and spot on in terms of we can't keep telling ourselves that people are coming just because they want our stuff and our freedom. It's just not true, right? People don't leave their homes and their communities and break their families apart and trek on foot just because they want our stuff and they want our freedom. That is a lie that our politicians tell us to distract from the things that the United States is actually doing in other places to destabilize them. So, yeah.
Mako, I know that I've been following your Facebook and your social media, and we've interacted a few times there as well. I think one of the things that's troubling for me, and I think it is maybe for you as well, if you can speak to it a little bit, is what are some of your greatest concerns about the church and the way it's approaching this conversation and handling the conversations as a whole?
That's, I think my biggest concern is loving your neighbor, right? But also some principles of truth telling. I've known Christians that I've interacted with on social media who are bearing false witness, right? Who would say, because that is a Mosaic command. Jesus repeats that and says that, hey, that carries over. But as an example, the deportation of migrants to El Salvador, even though they're Venezuelan, and now we know that as many as 238 of them were innocent of any criminal wrongdoing, and it's just terrible. Bearing false witness was not just lying, but specifically lying about someone else's character, right? In order to get them in trouble, indicted, or somehow civically punished, or make them pay a fine. I think we really have to be asking ourselves now Sermon on the Mount type questions of like, at what point is our anger coloring our lens too much, right? Like it's making us overreact. It's making us step out of the character of Christ when we're lying about other people, and even justifying it retroactively by saying, well, they came here illegally. Well, no, that's it. We're already prejudging them, right? And so Christian principles like due process or innocent until proven guilty, like those are Christian principles. The first person in early church history to apply that to a pagan law code or insert it there was Justinian in the 500s. And it is one of the things that ought to make us proud as Christians. Like this is one way Christian faith influenced law codes everywhere, and we're turning our back on it. So taking boundary cases and or constitutional law principles, but also like Sermon on the Mount, heart level principles of, I understand we feel anger and resentment, but we can't let that color our view of people or our processes of what is right.
Yeah, thank you. Very well said. So, Mako, I think we both come from a foundation of saying, that the scriptures really need to fashion and form and shape our understanding and how we approach these issues. And I'm sure we could do an entire session or more. I know you have done stuff on this as well. So let's lay the foundation for this conversation. What does the Old Testament say Obviously, in 200 words or less, as if that's possible, about caring for the immigrants and the foreigners. And maybe also, if I think you can tie it to, did Israel's experience as foreigners in Egypt help shape those biblical commands?
This is such an important question. And I think I want to start with saying it's even before they're in Egypt, right? Like when Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and then the chosen family are in on the land of Palestine or the land of Canaan, and their experience there is part of the process God was using, where they were foreigners. They were foreigners, right? And they were pilgrims. And so when they go into Egypt, they are still that, and they pick up some other ethics like anti-human trafficking, right? Like in Exodus 21, verse 16, someone who kidnaps a person and tries to enslave them, in Jewish law, that brought about the death penalty. Now I want to also say that Israel remembered that they were strangers and sojourners with me, right? In Leviticus 25, verse 23, and then in Deuteronomy 25, verse 4, there was a creed. My father was a wandering Aramean, meaning Abraham and Sarah. Like they were, in other words, even though they were in the land and they were stewarding the garden land, to reflect something about God's character, even that had this measure of temporality and provision. It was provisional. And when they went into exile to Babylon and other nations, and even some Jews came back, it does seem to me like exile was the sociological and theological condition that was underlying all of that. So when I know we'll get into this, but when the New Testament in Hebrews, James, 1 Peter comes along and says, we continue to be pilgrims, foreigners, strangers, and sojourners, because Jesus said, I have no place to lay my head. All of that now becomes continuous. There is a foundation on which we are building, which is really challenging for us, because I think we want to treat nation states as if they are a given. They are not a given, right?
Okay.
Our first loyalty is to God in Christ, and then it's shown by how we love one another. And then we often steward resources, but it's not something that we have a right to draw hard boundaries around.
Yeah. I think you started to go there, but a lot of people today ignore the Old Testament commands in the sense that because that was Israel, that was another time and place. So you started to make that connection in the New Testament era, but the commands of Jesus to love your neighbor, all of this. Can you just flesh the New Testament perspective out a little bit more for us, and how that builds on that and develops an ethic around which we can talk about this immigration issue?
I think the New Testament is really challenging when it comes to this, because just take Luke 10 and Jesus's Good Samaritan parable. What is Jesus doing with ethnic boundaries, with religious or semi-religious sensibilities there, or what is our obligation to help people in their flourishing and in their life, right? And Jesus touches on all those things, and it's really challenging. I mean, in the end, I think Jesus would say, we don't get to choose our neighbor, right? Our neighbor is whoever needs our help.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's really challenging. And we got to take that seriously.
Yeah. One of the most fascinating things about the Good Samaritan parable to me is the victim there is unconscious and naked. And the two identifiers of his cultural background would have been his dress and his accent or his speech. So those are removed from the equation. So he's just a human being.
Yes.
They have to react to the presence of a hurting human being without the filter of the bias that they might have brought into. So they have to decide what they're going to do with a human being, and not knowing perhaps where he's from. And it was obviously the Samaritan who chooses to act neighborly in that.
That is such an important point, Danny. Thanks. And, and I think Pentecost in Acts 2 also sets up at least a posture for Christians, where God takes the effort to speak in other people's languages, in their heart languages, and he empowers his people to do that. And so it was a miracle of speech, not a miracle of hearing, right? Because you could imagine Pentecost could have gone this way, like everyone is speaking Hebrew or Aramaic, and all the visitors to Jerusalem are hearing people speak in their own language, right? If God did the miracle in my ear, then that's, but that, then, okay, everyone gets the impression, hey, God is just speaking directly to me in my own heart language. But actually, no, everyone hears God speaking in everyone else's heart language too. Right. And so I know, and I say that because I know there are things about, there are fears that we have as Americans about cultural uniformity, or, and often that gets translated into language, right? Like, hey, you know, I can't everyone just speak English, or things like that. And well, you know, in an ordinary human sense, I can understand. And yet I, as a Christian, am informed by a Pentecostal paradigm, in this sense, where God has his people speak other people's languages because it's missional. You know, and later in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul also says, you know, I become all things to all people. Now, I think he's also aware of his own human constraints and things like that. So, but I think he's stating the principle of, you know, I think it falls on us. So, you know, that also challenges the desire to put the nation state or cultural uniformity at the start and make it unquestioned. God in Christ doesn't do that, right? It's always all humanity, you know, and Danny, to your point, a basic humanity, but respecting and recognizing language differences, and you know, some of these, which does translate into some cultural differences in a principled way. But I think that's another principle here.
Yeah.
Very good. Mako, of course, you know, one of the things that I've been really trying to stress as I watched Facebook and social media going back to 2016 was just the way the rhetoric was going around, and it was not only non-Christian in the way we were conducting ourselves, but there was almost a level of not Christian in what we're even saying as well. But what's even more concerning about that is just the unwillingness or the inability to critique your own side. The whole idea, the reality is, when we're dealing with empire, and it doesn't matter what, even if it's a just war, I'm not sure I really believe in any such thing as a just war, but even if there was, you're still going to have people that have weapons and arms, and they're going to misuse it. They're going to abuse it. Or you put somebody in a particular political position, and they're going to use that power, or you empower ICE officials. They're going to abuse it. They just simply are, whether it's Hamas or whether it's the IDF or whether it's ICE or whether it doesn't matter. And so let's talk a little bit to that a little bit in terms of the Christian responsibility to first off frame our understanding in light of the gospel and the kingdom. And you've done a really good job of pointing out, hey, the gospel goes to the nations, right? And that's the thesis of my commentary on the book of Revelation, that it's the love of the nations that we lay down our lives for. But to love the nations, we need to hear their story, understand their story. And so kind of with all that in mind, kind of some thoughts that we might have to help us frame, how do we even approach these issues in a Christian way and from a Christian framework?
I think we have to start with each person is made in the image of God.
Amen.
But also, I mean, that's kind of a given, right, from Genesis 1, and therefore deserving of as much respect as we can give. And then also that we are born in a relational way, in relational contexts. And so, like, we're born into families, and to the extent that is possible, we want to keep those families intact. So, you know, when you know, dare I say, you know, from when Trump's first administration, you know, separating kids from their parents to inflict psychological harm intentionally as a deterrent to the parents. Well, I think that just went a bit too far, and
Yeah.
I think the Methodist Church as a whole was correct in actually calling Jeff Sessions before church discipline.
Oh,
um, because he was part of a Methodist church in
oh, I didn't know that.
Alabama, and
All right.
and it's that kind of thing. So both, yes, we're made in the image of God, but
Right.
we're also embedded relationally, and we want to try to respect that.
Yeah.
So I would say those are some important starting points. And then as far as how we discuss these things from a policy standpoint, I think we have to at least try to speak truthfully, right, and not bear false witness, as I said, and then the second, and then give people due process of law, not just because it's a Fifth Amendment in the Constitution, but also because that's a Christian principle. The reason why that's in our Constitution is it comes from Jewish law and it continues on through Jesus, right? It's the presumption of innocent until proven guilty. That's why Scripture is against scapegoating. And bearing false witness is something that Scripture is very sensitive to.
Yeah.
And it's present, it's present in the city of refuge legislation in Numbers chapter 35, I believe, where it says the congregation shall save in verse 25 there. Like they're trying to do as much as they can to discern whether this person was guilty of accidental homicide or intentional murder, right? Because that makes a big difference. And the principle there in Jewish law is connected to the vulnerability principle. Like, when someone is scapegoated, they instantaneously become vulnerable to other people, whether it's blood feuds or just false accusations or things like that. And we have to be careful and to think through our processes for determining guilt.
It's a bit like Old Testament cancel culture.
That's right.
So, all right. So one of the objections, or one of the issues that's raised by a lot of people, is the impact of illegal immigration on the economy. That's a multifaceted question. There are all kinds of aspects of it, from they're taking our jobs, they're doing this or that. I just would again, maybe speak a little bit about the overall economic impact, the perceived negative impact on the economy, and any thoughts you have on that part of the issue, because that's another big concern that people have.
Yes, it's a very real concern, and I would say I would want to differentiate between a local economy, like a city or region, and the national economy, especially long term, because I want to recognize that it is a hit to a local economy. If you have new kids coming to school every week, that's a real challenge. If you have people showing up in the ER more and more, yes. So local cities and regions do feel the hit, and I think that if I can just make a generalization, the border states are absolutely right in calling for more help, in saying that the national government needs to step in some more. But I think that there's and to segue though into there's a larger issue of all the data on the national level, and especially in the medium to long term sense, indicates that immigration is a good thing. And there's a great video put together by the progressive group called More Perfect Union. It was about the Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, and you could find it easily on YouTube, and I really encourage our viewers to check that out, because it's only 30 minutes, and it talks about how they're eating the pets, and even there was a suspicion or a vicious rumor that said, well, the Haitians are getting government benefits that we aren't, right? And native, or if there is a native Springfield, Ohioan, then they were upset with that, but it wasn't true. But it's just so easy then to scapegoat these folks. Now, did it cause rents to rise? Yes. I mean, it did. However, could we have handled it from a different policy perspective, right? Like making more housing. And also it was really interesting that both white American and Haitian immigrants were working 12-hour days at these new companies
Right.
started up, and with no time off. And so, once the city had declared somehow, that they were going to be immigrant friendly and to attract companies because there was going to be more labor there. Yeah, I mean, that became labor exploitation because it wasn't it wasn't labor union jobs like it was in the 50s and 60s in Springfield, and I think Springfield, Ohio was on the cover of Newsweek or Time magazine as like one of the most desirable places to live, I think, in the 70s and 80s. So what happened? Of course, the deindustrialization happened because of NAFTA, or basically because we gave finance more privileges in our laws and policies than workers, than laborers, and more than communities. And rather than deal with those problems, like directing and disciplining the flow of investment capital back into communities, instead, it becomes easier to blame Haitians for taking jobs or things like that. And, it was insincere. And the documentary shows how, and I know, I'm naming JD Vance here. So, but his team they knew that it was a lie, and yet they spread the lie anyway. Right. And so what happened? Bomb threats to the schools and threats to the Haitian community and things like that. It was just awful. And this is a man who says that he's been a Catholic for a minute. So how could you do that in good conscience?
I've seen that documentary. It actually is well done, and it's interesting because obviously that's where for the debate was issue. They're eating the cats and dogs, and they discussed that as well. So there's a lot of conversation about how immigrants affect public services like healthcare, education, welfare. Do you have a lot of information on that you can help us with? And by the way, if you have resources on your website that talk to some of this, well, feel free to throw that out as well, and I'll make sure that I put all that information in the statement or whatever on the YouTube channel when it goes up there as well. So,
well, there's I would rely on local statistics, right, for like Texas or Springfield, Ohio, and what they're saying about how many kids are coming into their schools or hospitals and things like that. In general, though, they're from a broader perspective. If I can talk about nationwide, right, like all of the things about what jobs do undocumented people take on. Right. So they take on jobs that most Americans do not. So from 2013, there was North Carolina said they needed 6,500 farm workers, and only 7 Americans stuck it out. Wow. Right. And so you can find information on that. I know the comedian Stephen Colbert did some things highlighting take our jobs, where like he teamed up with migrant workers, made a website, and they said, hey, take our jobs. And like maybe 2 people did. Like, Americans don't want to do these jobs. And that raises a whole bunch of other questions of like, well, why? But is this being really inhumane? Are there too many chemicals that people are being exposed to? Is it too repetitive? Are people just breaking their bodies? But so there are a whole bunch of other questions that we need to really be asking about the work itself. But it's very clear, like, especially now, because of the fear that so many undocumented people have. I have seen family farmers saying, we have no one showing up to work because they were undocumented. So we have these crops in our field, but no one to pick them. And then, that was in the state of Wyoming, and Wyoming has 70% of its agricultural workers being undocumented. And so they're in a real crisis. So there are things like that. undocumented people make up, I'm forgetting now, 40 to
Yeah.
50% perhaps of the construction industry. And so, we're in a place where I think we do need to build more housing. And so, but the cost of that is going to go up because the labor is short.
Mm.
And then there's a whole other conversation about technology and maybe the H-1B visa, which I have very mixed feelings about and lean against, because I feel like there's ways that there are ways that undocumented people in general, whether they're, kind of low skill or high skill, are put at a disadvantage. Like they can't join a labor union, they can't raise complaints to their employer about the way they're treated. And, if we're going to value them as laborers, then let's value them as people. And let's put more policies in place that require that employers treat them well, right? And so I think then that, well, I personally would be willing to pay a little more, right, for ethically sourced food, clothing,
Right.
and things like that. We've just seen, with Trump's tariffs, a whole bunch of people say they're willing to pay more, ostensibly. So why don't we apply that ethic in the other direction?
Yeah.
Right, of like making sure we're doing things that are ethically sourced.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe this, there's so many tangents we could go down. I have
Yeah,
a million
right.
questions in my head, but let's, for sake of time here, just at least take a quick look at the security issue. Because I know this, like I said, it's a concern that a lot of people have. I've had a lot of discussions about the security issue, and I have a number of friends that have been in government service and have worked in this area of security and stuff. And, they make comments to me like the number of people on how difficult it is to get on the U.S. watch list, terrorist watch list. And yet once we've already captured, a couple of dozen people on that watch list who have come in illegally. If we caught 2 dozen of them, how many more have made it through? With this lax border security around that, then we've got this real problem. That's then of course you get all the questions about drug smuggling coming in and all of the security law, those issues. I don't know if you got some thoughts to help us on that at all.
Yeah, I mean, just taking drug policy as a start, the vast majority of let's say fentanyl coming into the United States is brought in by United States citizens, right? It's not brought in
right
through the border. It's through ports of entry, and it's even, I don't know how much of it's synthetically producible, and so it could be produced domestically. Right. So I think we have to be really careful and just attentive to facts. It was mind-blowing to me that Trump was willing to levy 25% blanket tariffs against Canada because of fentanyl. Now because the accusation, it didn't make sense. I mean, 0.2% of all the fentanyl coming into the US came from Canada. I mean, right. That's small enough to fit into a backpack. And then he was willing to throw a blanket tariff up, or at least that's how he negotiated.
Right.
And right. I just don't think that honors Canada and our relationships with them. So, yes, we can take this seriously, but I think when it comes to drug use, we have to also pay attention to how previous wars on drugs have actually gone, and why it is that, for example, Portugal is a good example of a country that has invested far more into education and regulation, and seen addiction rates drop, and their overall the expense that they're paying socially to address these things has been far better. So to take a surveillance approach, a punitive approach, it's more expensive and less effective.
Yeah, but there's also there are violent crimes. I mean, the Lake and Riley case is one that gets a lot of it, and rightly so. I mean, it was a tragic thing, a horrible thing. And because of cases like that, and now there's laws associated with her name that have come in to try to deal with this. And even in the even though in the exportation of these of the illegal aliens that they're rounding up now, the big thing is these are hardened criminals, even though we found out that not all were that. But the rationale for this is there are a lot of bad people coming into our country, and we've got to stop that. And there are real concerns around that part of it. Any thoughts on how we approach that part of it and do it? Again, we're back to this balance between being humanely caring for both the immigrant and the citizen. Both sides of this issue. We've got to learn to talk about that as well.
Absolutely, and it is true that new migrants and immigrants to the country commit crime at lower rates than U.S. citizens, but it doesn't mean that we should just look the other way. So I'm for stronger, or at least some background checks and things like that, and vetting. I mean, we do that in many situations. So I know right now this discussion is focused mostly on the southern border, but we should talk about Ukrainians or Afghans,
right,
or others, and so the issues are complex. In general, though, part of the reason why new migrants or people who are in the process of getting their naturalization or a work visa or other things commit crimes at lower rates is because of the threat of deportation.
right.
And so, I think one of the things that we need to do is say, look, to the earlier point, on the whole, immigrants actually contribute to our economy. They pay into Social Security without getting the benefits, right?
Exactly.
And we are beneficiaries of their innovations. Like Venezuelan migrants are some of the most educated people around. The court, I forget now which judge said, it is clear that this administration has animus towards Venezuelans because on the whole, like they actually are very well educated. And so it's not a zero-sum game, right? Like it's just like we also want more Americans to have more kids, or at least I do. I think that would be healthier for us. We could design policies that are more family friendly, and that would also expand our economy. And it's not a zero-sum game. Right. So, it creates jobs as much as anything else. So coming back to then the question of security, I think we need to dedicate more resources to the immigration process as a whole and just speed it up, because when people get lost or they feel despair or about the process, then they're at greater risk. And I think when there's a way in which, now I'm forgetting exactly what situation causes this, but Peter Zion is a geopolitical strategist, and he has a YouTube channel called Zion on geopolitics, and he says he makes the very important point that if we push people, migrants, undocumented folks, into the shadows, they're going to actually be victims of crimes at higher rates, because they're not going to be able to access financial services or open a bank account and do things like that, which then makes them part of the cash economy. And then people around them will notice, and they will be vulnerable to crime. So, part of the reason why we want to expedite people through the immigration process into some stable, documented status is because, number one, they're motivated. They want to contribute here, and number two, it also keeps them protected and just because they could regularize their life, they don't have to hide from law enforcement or something. And that has ripple effects.
Sure.
Interesting. Well, we want to thank you again. We're wrapping up here in a minute, but we want to remind everyone that Determined Truth is a 501c3 nonprofit. We offer YouTube and live stream videos. We have a podcast, blogs and posts. And our goal is to challenge the church to be the church. Danny and I work with about 100 pastors or more in India and trying to expand that ministry maybe to other parts of the world as well. So every week we're teaching and training leaders, but we want to provide everything that we do free of charge. We will not charge for anything that we do. It's all free of charge. So we can only do so with your support. If you want to help us there, go ahead and go to determinetruth.com and look find out how to do that. But also, of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like it and hit the alert button so that you're updated on when the next live stream is going to be. Go to the podcast and subscribe to that and follow us there. Follow us on social media as well. And we'll put Mako's information on how to follow him at Anástasis Center on the show notes and things of that nature as well. But Mako, you've already touched on it a little bit. You mentioned the article that I wrote about how one of the neglected factors is the fact that many people are coming to our borders and the increase of immigration in the last 20 or more years, you might have a better framework on the dates there, has been a result of American foreign policy in a lot of cases. The things that we've done that actually cause crime or cause poverty or cause issues in some of these foreign countries. So can you speak to that just a little bit? I know you've talked a little bit about like the banana companies and the banana republics or the NAFTA, or I know you've referred to the Gun River book. I think Eon Grillo's Blood, Gun, Money book. So any one of those stories or aspects that you want to touch on a little bit here to help us understand that some of these people that are coming to our borders are coming for legitimate reasons to escape things that in many ways we actually as Americans contributed to or caused.
Absolutely. And so if I can start with the Iron River example, the flow of guns that go south, right? The people come north, but the guns flow south, mostly because American gun manufacturers view Latin America as a profit center of violence.
Oh, wow.
Like guns, what are guns in terms of commodities? Well, if you take care of your gun can outlive you, which means that if you're a gun manufacturer, you have to convince more and more people to buy your product.
Oh,
right. So how does that happen? And well, one way is just to flood the zone. There are certain things that they do in the U.S. to make guns a lifestyle brand, but in Latin America, they just don't care. So they just ship guns to the cartels, and they have people that cross the border that go south, and Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum said that hey, this needs to be part of the negotiations. And you know why? It's because Mexico they have laws, they have their own Second Amendment version, but they regulate it pretty well. They have one gun shop, one in Mexico City. And then you hear about all this violence. Well, we know that at least 70% of the gun violence committed in Mexico by the cartels are done with American guns and ammunition, or at least they came from the United States. Maybe they're, German gun or whatever, but it's shipped across the border. And do we care enough? Like maybe we really should, because it's part of being a good neighbor. And we complain then about, Latin Americans coming up and fleeing violence from their homes.
Right.
Well, how did that how did that start?
Right.
Well, it's resourced by, I'm going to say us, but I mean the interests of corporate gun manufacturers, and we just don't care enough to stop it. And that exacerbates patterns from the past where we have displaced farmers in Latin America, Honduras, for example, because the bananas that United Fruit grew and then shipped back here, they took the best land from the Honduran farmers. And then we put in banana republics, like the governments that they were funded, or they were in many cases trained by us at the School of the Americas by the CIA. And then they have all these connections to our intelligence, to our military, and they lead revolutions, they take over, and of course they're just lining their own pockets. So we have interfered with Latin American democracy over and over and over again. And it just erodes citizens' confidence in their own governments there. So, and at certain times, if you add things then like, well, sanctions on Venezuelan oil, it's going to just make things collapse. So it's no wonder that people then flee their homes. There's also things that we're doing ecologically that are just causing more extreme weather events, again, driving people off their lands and, well, to either Mexico or the United States. These are the real reasons why people are coming here. And again, we really need to stop telling ourselves the lie that they're just chasing our stuff and our freedom. Let's stop flattering ourselves. And what that will encourage us to do is to unite our foreign policy with our immigration policy. They are totally linked. So, that has to be something we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're doing a lot of this on our Revelation Revealed series. I'm doing what's the beast, what's the false prophet, what is the great heart of Babylon, and what people don't understand is American foreign interest is often corporate driven. So what's going on in Venezuela, and that's a really complex issue, is the fact that Venezuela has the largest source of oil in the world, at least what's produced, and that the American oil companies and Canadian oil companies want in on that. And of course, if the government isn't obliging with that, then we're going to oust that government. And so there's a whole lot going on there. I know Anya Parampil has written a phenomenal book on exposing a lot of this. And there's YouTube videos on this as well, that maybe what we're being told about the corrupt Venezuelan government and the legitimate Venezuela is maybe that's actually not really what's going on. Maybe what's going on actually is corporate greed and American corporate interests are actually facilitating the nation states to act in the way that they're acting. And of course, as a scholar of the book of Revelation, I say that's the beast. That's exactly what the beast is. And then one last point before Danny asks the final question. And that is, you talk about earlier about how we have to be willing to have higher prices and pay more things, of course. And that also, of course, is that this, you can't serve wealth and, God and mammon type of thing that Jesus is talking about. The fact is that we like our power, our comfort, our security, and our goods coming in at low prices. And because of that, we oppress people in foreign countries by squashing down the price of the labor, things of that nature, and causing depression there, or selling their grain at cheaper prices because our grain is subsidized by the American government. And as a result, we can undercut their government and their grains and just put all their employees out of business, as we've done with Mexican farmers as well. And they have to come to the United States for work because we took their jobs away from them. So I don't know if you want to comment on that before Danny asks the final question there.
That's right. I was in Haiti in 2014, and I was, working in campus ministry at the time, and we were kind of on a learning and service project with American students, Dominican students, and Haitian students. And one of the things we talked about is, why are there all these huge 25-pound bags of rice with the American flag on it all over Haiti, when Haitian rice is delicious. It's wonderful. And what it has done is it's, driven Haitian farmers off their lands because it drove them bankrupt. That means many of them came into the cities like Port-au-Prince, primarily Port-au-Prince, which is then, overcrowded and overtaxed, and it's caused a crisis. So, and that's on top of other things that, Haiti has had to wrestle with because of colonial, imperial France and also the United States asserting what's called the Monroe Doctrine. And all of what we've just mentioned has been basically part of the attitude of the Monroe Doctrine. Like, it's not just we don't want European powers interfering in the Western Hemisphere. It's that we want to interfere in the Western Hemisphere all over the place and not pay a price.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we could go on and on and on and on and on here. I got about a list about this long of questions.
Yeah.
But we're running out of time for today. I think we may have to do another one of these and pick up some things. So there's so many avenues of this that I think need exploring and more attention. But quickly before we close, let's just go back to us as the body of Christ, kingdom people. What are some of the practical ways that we can be involved? Got some suggestions. I've been involved in some advocacy work and myself, and it's surprisingly effective, and people don't understand that. But along with that and some other things, you have some comments on what are some practical steps we can take?
Churches have been, my church has been involved in resettling refugees. And so, given the climate today, I won't get more specific than that, but it's been a huge privilege. It's also a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
And we have had to connect with, other local organizations, pre-existing churches that speak the language of the people, just helping folks find housing, get the kids in school, and so forth. It's not trivial, and yet it is. I think it's one of the most rewarding things that we have done in recent times. And to see folks who were fleeing violence be able to sleep better at night, and to say, we have more hope here. Well, that
Right.
I think is some of the best parts of
Amen.
being in the U.S. And they will be contributing members, grateful members of this country. That is incredible. I think we probably need to also, as church communities, just be more attentive to conditions on the ground in our locality, and there are ways that we can help people, because maybe there's already a community, from that country, that shares a country of origin or region of origin. I have a lot of other questions that are kind of unresolved about which, meaning I think requires more research. I'm looking for people who are also doing similar research of, rural communities. Like, if people come from rural backgrounds, are there ways that they can be close to a rural community and be productive members there? So questions like that, or climate similarities. I mean, I think it would help to do things like that. I'm struck by how many people from tropical countries get sent to Minnesota, and it's quite cold. And I have nothing against Minnesota, and maybe they're quite happy, but I think the questions about climate compatibility and familiarity, I think it's worth at least a few more questions. But so I think there's things like that. We definitely need to be providing or plugging people into legal assistance, to being translators, advocates for them at schools, and connecting people to jobs.
Mako, this has been great. I know it's just always a pleasure to listen to you talk, because you have so much information and your heart is so good. And we want to thank you so much. We thank you guys who have been watching online. Some great comments in the comments. No questions per se, but some really good comments. We appreciate those as well. And hopefully we can continue this conversation. Anything more about how people can follow you and your work and keep in tune there? We'll put obviously the Anástasis Center.org thing in the show notes and stuff like that. But anything else that you want to throw out for us?
Well, just the website anastasiscenter.org would contain all the jumping off points from there. We do have courses that are on our Thinkific platform, as well as our YouTube channel has a bunch of videos that we're doing. I want to flag that I'm trying to launch a new series on God's fingerprints in the U.S., where I think that I'll just say the right and the left are kind of missing each other here, because the right has a version of how has God been in U.S. history, and what does it mean for God to be involved in the U.S. as a nation. That I think some of it is good. I think a lot of it misses the mark. On the other hand, the secular left has no theology because they don't want to talk about God, or they certainly don't have a theology of divine providence, right? Like that. How has God been involved in the U.S.? So I totally think there are fingerprints of God in the U.S. that go all the way back to the early church, and I'm very deeply concerned that we not turn away from those, because those are the most precious things I think there are about being a Christian in America. So that's a video series that is on the YouTube channel, and people can find that also from the website.
Great.
And you can get lost on that website.
Yeah, so
You
much
can
good
spend
stuff.
days, weeks, months, and maybe even years, because you have so many resources, and then so many links in the footnotes and everything else, and resource. And some of the links are full on books. Some of the links are articles that take you a while to read. Some of the links are YouTube videos. Phenomenal stuff. I appreciate so much
Yes,
the
really
work
good
that you're
stuff.
doing. We want to highly recommend that everyone tune into the Anástasis Center and the work of Mako. All right. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Yes,
We'll be
thanks,
back here in the
Mako.
next couple of weeks. Stay tuned for more. Appreciate
Thanks,
you guys.
Rob and Danny. Deeply appreciate it.
Great.